Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and as always, seconded by a Mr. Well, I want to call him the Davos Seaworth to my Jon Snow, a one Mr. Brian E. Roach. Brian, I nearly called you the mother of dragons, but I think Sir Davos, being, as they always say, the old man jokes to him on Game of Thrones, for those who caught the reference, I think it's more fitting in this case, other than you being, the breaker of chains and yada, yada, yada.
I'm good with being Davos. This pleases me because I can say the following. You know nothing, Jon Snow.
I know you were going there, but and I almost said something, but I'm not going to spoil for those who didn't get to see. So, there's a lot of folks that I know, Northeast Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, without power, lost internet and stuff, and it was just not good timing for the premiere of Game of Thrones yesterday. Some very angry people, including my sister-in-law, who had to watch it using her cell phone data and on the tiny screen. And, I always make fun of her because she has like an older Galaxy phone that's like this, relic. It should be in a museum already. So it's gone through probably just as many battles as a Jon Snow. But yeah, Sir Davos is kind of like the Jon Snow's hand, so you're kind of like my hand. And in some cases, the hand of the king and or queen in the cases wields as much power as the king or queen. So, we're on equal footing, I think. It's like 1A and 1B.
Yeah, there you go. I can live with it. I don't need any fancy titles. What do I care about titles?
just so, for those who aren't familiar with Game of Thrones, Sir Davos Seaworth is a landed knight and a former smuggler who was in the services of, some of the former kings and whatnot. Now he's proclaimed to Jon Snow, who is supposed to be the king of the North. So that would make me the king, and that makes you a guy that came up from flea bottom, from nothing up to what we are now. And it kind of is the way I am too. I guess I'm a well, we don't swear on the show, but the technical term that begins with a B for those who are born out of wedlock. So we'll just leave it at that. I think it's a very fitting, maybe one of our more fitting analogies here as we get to the topic at hand. We've been talking draft, and just a little bit of a programming note. Brian, I think you're planning another mock draft maybe at the end of this week, and then we're going to skip the beginning of next week. I know a lot of yins will be clamoring and looking for some more information, unless there's some type of breaking news, because we will be coming to you almost instantly following each night of the NFL draft. So be looking for that each night or early in the wee hours of the morning, and we'll have some thought on the Steelers picks and some of the other moves from the NFL draft.
Absolutely correct. That's the plan, is to I think we will record it sometimes toward the end of the week. If it doesn't get up Friday, it'll get up Saturday.
Yeah, and that way everyone has something to listen to through the weekend or the beginning of the week, and then we're going to bombard you with content with the NFL draft. And then, what I'm going to do, and what you're probably going to do, our analogies are going to shift from Game of Thrones to Avengers soon.
Oh, yeah, very quickly.
Yeah, so we still have a week to go here. So we want to talk about, we've pretty much hammered everything with the Steelers, a lot of the offseason moves. We've talked about priorities for certain positions. We've talked about other mock drafts. We've had our own mock drafts, talking about targets, talking about draft visits, talking about whether they can or can't move up, what that might cost, how all of these things fit together. But there's one other key component to that, and that is they kind of have to look at the teams. Usually, a team is building. Of course, you're building to have your best team win a Super Bowl, but the best way to do that is that you have 6 games each season that are against teams within your own division, home and away. That would be the Cincinnati Bengals, the Cleveland Browns, and the Baltimore Ravens. And lo and behold, some of you may not be familiar with this, but the Browns have not, in fact, won the Super Bowl yet, even though their fans may try and convince you otherwise. And some of those fans, their opinion kind of goes out the window with some of those bad mock drafts we had on the last episode, when they try and say that the Browns will beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. That is actually impossible because they can't play each other in the Super Bowl. They're in the AFC. So it's just, there's some mind-blowing stuff that's out there. And we're going to talk a little bit about Cleveland here in a second. But just to preface all of this, we're going to take a look at those three teams in particular, how the Steelers may even be built. Like, I keep thinking, Brian, I mean, we talk about, we're going to talk about the team needs for each team. And we're pulling this off of some various internet websites as well as our own feelings because very well we have one for the Bengals that may come as a surprise. But let's talk about what some of these sites say are needs for the Steelers real quick. So wide receiver, they almost all say that because Antonio Brown's gone. I say don't sleep on James Washington just yet. The Steelers already spent a second-round pick on him last year. They know what they've got there. They know what the potential is. We've seen things with training camp. He's going to learn and grow. Linebacker, cornerback, and edge, we've all said that those have been pretty much pressing needs. If you feel the need to have to cover Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham, cornerback, I may edge myself towards that, but I think they're going to be looking at that in the draft. And then they say that not the more pressing needs, but other positions they could look at are safety and tight end, which is what we've talked about. Not a need, of course, interior offensive lineman and quarterback. So I think I pretty much agree with that. What do you think, Bri?
It's funny. I've been talking to some folks in the back rooms, and it used to be that what I felt the number one need of the Steelers was inside linebacker, which we've all been hammering, the Devons. And as time has progressed and things have changed, I'm falling pretty steadily off that as my number one need. Is it a primary need? Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. So I can't argue with, some of the takes about, excuse me, about how, you've got wide receiver as a need, you've got linebacker as a need, cornerback, even edge as a need. I can't disagree with any of that. But I think it won't surprise me if it's definitely not an inside linebacker at the top of their picks.
Yeah, and it all depends on who's available and what they feel is the best player available. If they have somebody like Byron Murphy as their, one or something like that, who knows? And, we talked about draft visits and things like that, and we shall see. That's what the most interesting part is in this. So we're going to try and fit the same thing here. And obviously, I'm not saying that they're not going to take that position. I almost look at this solely first round and maybe even second round because we're looking at guys who are going to start day one or have the ability to be a starter soon enough. And I mean, a corner is just going to add depth. And when I look at some of the weapons that the other teams have, not the Ravens, obviously, but the Browns have quite a bit. I don't know where the Ravens are going to go, to be quite honest. And we're going to talk about them. But first, let's go in the order of the draft. Drafting 11th overall, Cincinnati Bengals, and some team needs for the Bengals. Yoy. Linebacker, offensive tackle, and tight end, but I think you could pretty much put just about every position here. I think their team is getting blown up as we speak. There's some changes going on in Cincinnati. We were talking about, where would some of these head coaches go? I mean, last year we had talked about who was on the hot seat. We felt Harbaugh could have been on the hot seat. He got an extension in Baltimore. We knew that Hugh Jackson wasn't going to last the entire season. We called that right out the gate. He didn't even last like barely half the season. And then Marvin Lewis is out of there. So maybe a little bit of regime change may change some things in Cincinnati. So some other needs might be for the Bengals drafting 11th. Quarterback, believe it or not, because they have a very team-friendly deal with Andy Dalton that they could just, kind of move on from him there. And then, of course, interior offensive lineman and cornerback. They brought Darquez Dennard back for another season. I don't know. I mean, I know they love their corners, but it wouldn't surprise me, all considering the way the organization is run, if they went corner or wide receiver yet again with one of their top picks. But I think the Bengals overwhelmingly need offensive linemen. You take a look at they're bringing Tyler Eifert back again on a one-year deal. The guy I don't think has ever played a complete season. And I don't know that they go we talked about whether tight ends could go number one overall, and you look at them at 11 for the same reasons we say about the Steelers. I don't know if they would necessarily go there. Now, that would thrill me because if one of these inside linebackers ends up falling later and later, hey, take offensive linemen, please. Take tight ends. Stay away from defensive picks. If you take offensive picks, Steelers are picking at 20. If like 16, 17 of those picks are like quarterbacks, offensive linemen, and positions the Steelers don't necessarily have a primary need with a top pick, that'll make me very happy because maybe one of the Devons falls there. Unfortunately, either one of those Devons could be in play for the Bengals there as well. So linebacker, tackle, tight end, I mean, that doesn't necessarily bode well for where the Steelers are going to draft, and they're going to need some help on that offensive line because it's not like the Steelers' defense is a pushover. They've led the league in sacks the last 2 seasons. We know what the Ravens can do. We know what the Browns have added. So if whether or not it's Andy Dalton or somebody they draft a quarterback, they're going to need some help to keep that guy upright.
Yeah, I'm going to add another one in here to what I believe is a need for the Bengals, and that's the defensive line. Not because Geno Atkins isn't still a great player, but their defense really wasn't that good. It kind of cratered last year. It kind of was mediocre at best, and they're going to need playmakers everywhere. So, that, as you said, does not bode well for the Steelers. We want them to go offense, and there's some reason to think they might because, they just had Cody Ford, who is the offensive lineman from Oklahoma, I think, in for a visit. If they're going to take him, they're going to have to take him at 11. He'll never be there in the second round for them. But they also had Paris Campbell in. Now, while I don't think they're going to draft Paris Campbell at 11, that could be a second-round pick for them. And if they happen to go O-line and wide receiver, I'd be thrilled, quite honestly, because it means there's going to be some positions for us, and it would prove them that they didn't learn anything from the John Ross pick. They're going to draft a wide receiver just because he's speedy, even though he doesn't have a true role. But I don't know that they would do that. And the problem that we have with the Bengals right now is while the overall regime is the same, you got Zach Taylor in there now, and not whatever his name was. I've already forgotten his name.
Marvin. Starving Marvin.
Yeah,
Lewis.
Starving Marvin.
Starving for a playoff
Marvin the
win.
Martian. He's gone. So you cannot necessarily count on them to be as inept as they have been in the past. But it's Zach Taylor's first draft. I don't know how much input he's going to have. Certainly he'll have some. And that's where I think there's a good chance that this idea of a quarterback could come into play as well. I know they had Dwayne Haskins down there.
Oh, I'd love
and
that.
if he got to 11, that would be an interesting pick for them because, we make fun of Andy Dalton and his throw the ball away on fourth down because he's tired of being sacked persona, or at least I do. And
I wouldn't forget it.
Yeah, and they have to remember that he is also the quarterback, the author of no playoff wins as a quarterback. So, at some point, it is time to say, do we need a new guy behind the wheel of our offense as well? Because they've primarily wasted, AJ Green's career as an elite receiver. And do they want to continue to do that or try and get whatever they can out of him for the remainder of that time? There's a lot of options for the Bengals here because they're a train wreck. And a lot of them are on both sides of the ball.
Politely putting it.
My brother's probably mad at me if he listens, which he doesn't because he's a Bengals fan. As we've said, he was dropped on his head when he was younger. But it is what it is. They're a team that their identity is clearly changing. They did get rid of some of the perpetual malcontents in there now that Pac-Man's gone and Vontez is gone. So we'll see. We'll see what they're like. But I don't expect some renaissance from the Bengals. I expect them to be in last place, to be quite frank. Yeah. And they just have too many needs to fill. It also would not surprise me to see them try and pull, the move back and get, multiple picks for future needs. If somebody like Dwayne Haskins or one of the other quarterbacks is there at 11 and somebody with a quarterback huge desire wants to move up. This is a team that I could see doing that. Even though they have tremendous needs, it just depends on how the board would fall in front of them. If the guy they want's not there and the right offer comes along because the quarterback that somebody else wants is there, it's a possibility because they have huge number of needs. So,
well, let's talk about that. They have 11 picks and five sixth round picks.
There's some quality.
Yeah, look at this. This is crazy. I mean, they go 183, 198, 210, 211, 213, and then as seventh rounder 223. They're like there's like a big cluster at the end of the draft there, and they may try and I don't know. It's the same thing. Like, what do you do with 11 picks? Do you have 11 holes on the roster? I mean, they may, but do you have 11 holes where you're going to fill it with 5 sixth rounders? It reminds me of the Browns. What did they do? Draft like 80 wide receivers a few years ago, and I don't know that any of those guys are still on the roster. I think they re-upped with maybe Ricardo Lewis, if I recall. We'll see when we get to their depth chart here in a second. But I'm looking at the Bengals depth chart. Of course, this is a team that finished 6-10 last year. I mean, they still have AJ Green, they have Tyler Boyd, John Ross. They were already trying to move, supposedly, and then they have some guys like Alex Erickson, Josh Malone, Cody Core. They're okay, I guess, when you look at wide receiver, and they got two guys that are they're capable workhorses there. Obviously, AJ Green is an All-Pro when he's at the top of his game, and he has a guy that can give him the football. Their offensive line is just a disaster. I mean, there's Cordy Glenn. You might be able to get by with him as your left tackle. Certainly, Clint Bowling. Billy Price was drafted last year as the center, the former Ohio State guy. Then you have Alex Redmond, a college free agent, and Bobby Hart, who's a street free agent, penciled in as their guys on their depth chart. And it doesn't get much better behind them. You got a bunch of guys who have been cut, waived, or otherwise, that are still sticking around behind them. When you look at their tight ends, Tyler Eifert is anything but a certain 16-game starter there. There's not much else there. They lost Tyler Croft. CJ Uzoma is the other guy that's there as well. And I want to say that he just got a decent contract. He's more of a blocking tight end. Kind of an oxymoron when the rest of the offensive line can't do the job. Andy Dalton, of course. Jeff Driscoll is behind him, and Brad Kaya. Remember when he was a draft darling? Pepperidge Farms. Pepperidge Farms remembers. And then there's Joe Mixon and Gio Bernard. So, I mean, they're okay. I mean, running back, they don't have a whole lot of questions. Wide receiver, they might need some depth, but it's really the offensive line right there, and whether or not they want to pull a Baltimore Ravens power play and go after a quarterback. Because let's face it, if you feel your team's going to improve, what are your odds going to be drafting as high? I'm not going to say it's necessarily the greatest quarterback class, but some of these guys, they get the Cupid eyes or whatever. They fall in love with a particular player, and I mean, the Steelers did it. They just so happened to get Mason Rudolph in the third instead of in the first. When you go on defense, I mean, Carlos Dunlap is still getting it done. Sam Hubbard's there. He had a heck of a first year, I think. Of course, we like our Buckeyes, so we're biased. Andrew Billings is still hanging around. He's still penciled in as a nose tackle there, but he's had his health problems throughout the years, too. I remember mocking him to the Steelers in the first round. I thought he was going to be the next. We were talking about Casey Hampton on the last show. That's what I thought he was going to be. So he's anything but certain, as you're saying. Geno Atkins has been playing for a while, and he plays at a very high level. He was drafted in 2010, and I mean, a defensive lineman. I mean, this guy could have a 15-year career if he so chooses. So he's probably in his prime right now. You got Jordan Willis was added to this team not too long ago in 2017. They still have Carl Lawson that's hanging around there and was a sack machine, but he's been banged up here or there. The linebackers, they got rid of Burfict, but I was talking about this. They still have Preston Brown there. They have Hardy Nickerson Jr. who got some playing time. He was drafted there 2 years ago. You got Chris Worley. You look at some of the other guys, Jordan Evans, Malik Jefferson was taken in the third round of last year, Nick Vigil. They're not exactly bare at this position. So it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people are penciling in the same way they say wide receiver with the Steelers because of Antonio Brown's departure. They have seen a future without Vontaze Burfict in much the same way the Steelers saw a future without Antonio Brown in some short spells here or there, and they know what they have, so they may be able to move without that. The secondary, Sean Williams, Jesse Bates. Jesse Bates just had his, this is his second year. Sean Williams has been a guy that they picked up a few years ago. ago, and he's been relatively solid. He was able to come in. Who'd they used to have there? I keep thinking of the guy with the dreads. George Iloka and trying to think of the other guy. They used to have Reggie Nelson. Was that his name? And so I mean,
Ben's favorite target that was not on our team.
Yeah, and I mean those guys were really good. But I mean, Father Time comes for everybody, and Jesse Bates had a good year last year. It was another guy we mocked to us, and then ended up going to the Bengals in the second round. William Jackson was another guy like that, and B.W. Webb's still hanging around on an NFL roster, but they did re-sign Darqueze Dennard, and of course, Drake Kirkpatrick is the other guy opposite William Jackson, the third. So, I mean, they're pretty good there. Their specialists are Randy Bullock, Kevin Huber, so those guys have been around for a while. I mean, I look at the defense. I don't know the defense is their most top-pressing need, even though their defense had collapsed some. I think it really is an offensive line draft for the Bengals, or they shock the world and go QB and start moving away from Andy Dalton the same way the Ravens moved on from Joe Flacco.
Yeah, it's just hard to get away from the Bengals will screw up the first round no matter what mentality, because how many years have we been saying they desperately need an offensive lineman?
All of them,
and they just don't see it. If they're smart. If this is a true change in philosophy and mentality, we'll see an offensive lineman get picked here at 11, and unless the guy they want is gone before then. But I don't actually think that will happen. So we'll see. It would be. I think all Steelers fans need to root for an offensive pick here. Ideally, let them do something really dumb like draft Paris Campbell at 11. But that I don't think they're quite that ridiculous.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah,
that would be a gem. And like you said, you don't trust them to not screw up a draft, and it's just because they make some, like, when we were making fun of them before about taking John Ross or taking somebody like a John Ross, and then they did it. You were just like, wow, So let's move on from them and let's go to a team that's been a thorn in the Steelers' side for reasons I can never figure out. I always have them penciled in at the bottom of the division. I don't know that they're necessarily going to be the bottom of the division because I think the Bengals are just that bad. And when I get to talking about the Browns, we could talk about the Ravens too. Well, there it is. The Baltimore Ravens, they finish 10-6. They win the AFC North because the Steelers couldn't, and that's pretty much how it works. I think it was just by default of the Steelers losing is the reason the Ravens even made the postseason, and I'm going to stick with that. They started their year, with Joe Flacco. They moved on to this Lamar Jackson deal. They've got... I don't know, I don't even know where to begin with them. Let's talk about team needs first with the Ravens. Wide receiver, that's been their team need for a few years now,
Perennial.
It seems like. Yes.
Perennial.
A linebacker, C.J. Mosley, he's out of town, man. He took that Le'Veon Bell type payday. The Jets are just, they got their new owner is the guy on the Monopoly board, apparently, and they're just throwing money around. Interior offensive line. I mean, offensive line, the Ravens have been surprisingly good at filling in the holes as they continue to lose players along the line, whether it be to injury or free agency, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see where they go there. I mean, they were able to Orlando Brown was a guy who fell that ended up playing better than where he fell. It was one of those things last year. He's one of their tackles. They got Ronnie Stanley. They invested a very high pick in, and then they got a college free agent as a center because they lost their one center. And then there's Marshall Yanda, who's been there for a minute. So those are pretty strong guys. Here's the thing that's interesting to me, though, when you're looking at this. So what they're saying here is that, once again, when you go to the secondary needs, wide receiver and safety, so they have wide receiver on here twice. They're saying that the Ravens don't need cornerbacks or tackles, quarterback or tight end. And when we make fun of the Bengals and say they always go wide receiver or corner, what happens when Noah Fant or somebody is sitting there? The Ravens, let me see, they're picking 22nd, so 2 after the Steelers. Steelers. And, if they're somebody that they like, they've moved up before, but they, to try and get ahead of the Steelers, it's kind of the opposite position as usual, where we see the Ravens or Bengals or whatever team, they're always jockeying for position because we know the other rosters pretty well. You see them a lot. You see them often. You know what you got to build and you're up against. The Ravens are interesting this year because after pick 22, they don't pick again until 85. So they don't have a second-round draft pick. They have 2 3s because they got a comp pick at pick 102. They have 2 4s. They have a 5th and 2 6th-rounders. So they have a total of 8 picks, which is not very characteristic of the Baltimore Ravens. They're usually loaded up on comp picks and draft picks, and this year, they're not going to be able to fill a lot of those needs through the draft. Now, they've had a problem with running backs. They kind of found, Gus Edwards, but they had also found Kenneth Dixon, whoever else they tend to throw back there. Remember, Justin Forsett was the guy maybe even 2-3 years ago. They haven't had consistency there since the whole Ray Rice ordeal. They signed Mark Ingram, who I don't know that Mark Ingram is necessarily the guy that's going to be the workhorse back. I mean, he split a lot of time with the Saints. I mean, it may be just because the Saints have a lot of weapons. I don't know how that's going to work in Baltimore. They're probably not looking at running back, or they're looking at let's just run the ball, period, because that's pretty much what Lamar Jackson and backup RG3 are going to be able to do. Because when you look at the wide receivers outside of Willie Snead, okay, we've seen Chris Moore's name before. They signed Seth Roberts, who was over with the Raiders and kind of not anything special, but like Jordan Lashley and Quincy Adebayo, I don't even know how to say his name. These are guys that are just kind of like on this roster right now to come to camp, and I really don't know if Lamar Jackson could deliver the ball to them. So when I look at the Ravens, I'm like, there's a lot of work that needs done here.
Yeah, my great fear is that DK Metcalf falls and we don't take him and he's there for the Ravens. Or that they figure out a way to move up to get him. Now, that fear is tempered by the fact that their quarterback can't throw the ball. So,
yes.
You kind of have to feel like the Ravens' number one option here is a wide receiver. But, they lost Terrell Suggs. They lost Zadarius Smith. They lost C.J. Mosley. Their defense took a major hit. And while they may think they've got backup players that can step in and fill those roles, why weren't they playing last year more? This was a top-tier defense that lost some top-tier guys. So it's not inconceivable that they could take, defensive line, an edge guy, a linebacker. As you said, Marshall Yanda's been there for, more than a hot minute. And at some point, they need to look interior on their offensive line. They've done a yeoman's job of building up the outside at the tackles. Now they got to focus on the inside. We'll just see. They could go so many ways, and it's, this is Ozzie Newsome's done. This is Eric DeCosta. It's his first year as a GM. For them, it's his first draft. Does he try to make a splash? Does he try and move up to do something that is not suspected? I don't see anybody really talking about the Ravens making a move, and it's understandable. They don't have a ton of draft capital to try and do it with. But wouldn't it be interesting to have a guy like this, who's a new GM, try and say, look, I can't fill all my needs with what I've got. Let me do something to make a splash and see if I can fill at least one of them with a stud. Who knows? It's a lot of speculation. I'm glad that they have as many needs as they have. And of course they'll draft a tight end.
Well,
because if they're going to just run the ball, we were talking the other day in our April Fool's show about drafting like 9 tight ends like the Ravens, so that they could do nothing but put these giant guys out there. Well, if all they're going to do is run the ball, what the heck do they need wide receivers for? Just draft tight ends, put them out there at wide out, and have everybody block
and play action constantly. I mean, they signed Nick Boyle to that big deal. That was the big announcement where we thought it was going to be something else, like C.J. Mosley or Zadarius Smith that they had lost in free agency, and we'll talk about them in a second. But yeah, Nick Boyle, and then they drafted the 2 last year with Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews. So, I don't know what you got to think. You got to think maybe wide receiver because they lost John Brown. They haven't had like anything there. Brashad Perryman never ended up panning out for them either. And I take a look at, let me see. They lost Eric Weddle, but they replaced Eric Weddle. I think they also have decent replacement for even Terrell Suggs possibly too, because of, you're talking about where players fall in the draft. Remember when Tim Williams was another guy that was, destined to be a Steeler, and then got this guy in the 3rd round. So he's tentatively penciled in to maybe be the next Terrell Suggs. We'll see how that ends up working out. It doesn't mean it is going to work out. They're trying to roll. They got some younger guys here that have been on this team for a minute because they've had all of these draft picks over the years. So like a Chris Wormley, Brandon Williams is still there. I don't know what to think about like their linebackers. I mean, right now you're looking at Chris Board, you're looking at Patrick Onwuasor, and I'm like, I don't know about any of these guys. I know Matt Judon is pretty solid. I know Tyus Bowser was another guy that a lot of people were high on. He was taken in the 2nd round in 2017. Their secondary, however, is rock solid. I mean, this is where we're talking about if the Steelers take a cornerback, wouldn't you? I mean, we were just talking about the Bengals, but doesn't this sound a lot better on paper than what the Bengals had? You have Brandon Carr, Jimmy Smith, Marlon Humphrey, and Tavon Young as your corners, and then you have Tony Jefferson and Earl Thomas, who was just signed former Seahawk, as your starting safeties. That's the kind of stability you're looking at if the Steelers went secondary with a high pick, in my opinion. I mean, Jimmy Smith has been on and off the field for various reasons throughout the last several years, but, he's always been a top-flight player. Brandon Carr was a guy they signed away from the Cowboys a couple years ago, and then Marlon Humphrey was a first-round pick in 2017. Tavon Young is primarily their nickels or slot corner when healthy. So, I mean, that looks like something where they don't have a pressing need whatsoever, but that front 7's got a lot of moving parts, and, they got guys who have left and that were very much contributors. It's hard to take away Terrell Suggs, Zadarius Smith, and C.J. Mosley and expect to continue what the Steelers would call the standard. So I think there's going to be some growing pains there. It's a whole new offense. It's a whole new general manager. As we said, it was Ozzie Newsome for all those years. They have a lot of tight ends. They have no wide receivers. You got one very good offensive lineman. You got 2 young guys at the tackles. I think you're okay there. But the interior of that offensive line, one guy that's really great is aging. The other 2 guys are kind of, they're there. It would be very interesting to see what the Ravens do in the draft. I'm not as much worried about them taking someone that the Steelers would be eyeballing, unless, of course, like you said, like a stud wide receiver falls in their lap. And even then, as you said, I'm not as worried, or you're not as worried, because I don't know that Lamar Jackson could deliver them the ball.
Yeah, I think in all likelihood, wide receiver is where they may go, but it just depends on how the board falls. If the right defensive guy is there, then then they'll take a D lineman or a linebacker. To be honest, because they draft after us, they're in a similar position, right? The Devons probably aren't going to be there for them either. And is there another linebacker that's worth a first-round pick? I don't think there is.
A lot of people say Mac Wilson, man. We've had that debate as well.
I don't. I'm not on the Mac Wilson bandwagon, although they do like their Alabama guys in Baltimore.
They do.
So it certainly isn't out of the realm of possibility. But you know what? You want to draft Mac Wilson at 22? You go right ahead. I will heartily accept that and be fine with it.
Yeah. I mean, what else is there to say there? And I mean, it's hard to, without saying all the draft moves, you could even see player moves with the draft like the Steelers did with Martavis Bryant. So it's really hard right now to just be like, oh, well, this team's going to be the favorite or this team's not going to be the favorite. But I'm almost, and every time I bet against them, they end up proving me wrong, the darn Ravens. But I still just don't see them as a playoff contender. They really shouldn't have been last year either. And I think that their element of surprise with the Lamar Jackson, kind of the shaking up the offense there. I think that was exposed by the Chargers of all teams, and I think there's going to be film on that this year. And it's just, I don't know. I don't see that necessarily being the threat. We didn't really get to see what the Steelers can do against that because we're lucky to have Flacco around. There was Lamar got some snaps here or there, but you pretty much knew when he came in under center that they weren't going to attempt to throw the football. So that leaves us with one other team that has made a plethora of moves. And one of those is getting rid of their first-round pick for this year, which is uncharacteristic. Usually they have multiple first-round picks. Not that it's worked out in their favor. But you've got the Cleveland Browns, who for the first time in a very long time, they only have like 7 picks, and they're not picking until 49. They have 1 in the 3rd, 1 in the 4th, 3 in the 5th round, and then the 6th and the 7th. And did I count that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm sorry, they do have 8 picks. But they, a lot of trading going around, and they, Cody Kessler going to the Jaguars and stuff of that nature last season. So when you look at the Cleveland Browns, all of a sudden everybody's like, especially Browns fans, they love winning the offseason. It seems like that's their favorite thing because they know when they're in season that it doesn't work out as well. And when you look at the Cleveland Browns, here's a team that finished 7-8-1 last year. And I have friends and family, as you know, I'm tormented with being married to a Browns fan. Well, they won 7 games last year, so they automatically, now that they've added Odell Beckham and, they've changed their coaching staff, they're automatically going to win. Brian, they were looking at the schedule with my one friend, and he's trying to convince me that the Browns are like a 13-win team this year. And I'm just like, no. I mean, he's like, we're going to split with the Steelers. We're going to split with the Ravens. Well, that's very well could happen. And I understand, they're playing like the Jets and, you get who else is on deck this year? I already forgot. The schedule looks weaker on paper, but it always does this time of year. You know what I mean? And then you get into September and things change drastically. I understand Odell Beckham, it's a big move for them. Olivier Vernon, another big move for them. They got rid of one of their starting safeties. They've been working on the offensive line. They still have a young quarterback. He's feisty, and that's the pick I would have made if I was the Browns over Sam Darnold. I would have taken Baker Mayfield in their spot too. That's the position that I had. But, I still look at their secondary. I still think they have some holes. They're still trying to use Greg Robinson as offensive tackle. That experiment's still going on there. And when I look at the Cleveland Browns not having a first-round pick and then giving away what they gave away to get Odell Beckham, you got to hope that they have an offense where they could deliver the ball to all these guys. And they changed, okay, you got rid of Hugh Jackson. That automatically won you some games. I think you or I could have went in there, Brian, and did better than Hugh Jackson because it just seemed like he wouldn't do anything that was obvious to help that team win. And now they have their former offensive coordinator, which is probably good for their quarterback. But now this guy, is he going to try and do the play calling, which we've seen fail? Hugh Jackson tried to do that. And I don't know, like, are they going to let this Todd Monken end up calling plays? And you got Steve Wilkes now moved over as defensive coordinator because they got rid of Greg Williams. So once again, you look at the Cleveland Browns, and they had something that they may have been able to build upon from last season. And they do have the core players coming back. But they're also back to another season of change. Maybe the playbook stays the same, and that's going to help Baker Mayfield. But now the defense has to go through another change too. And we're going to go through this depth chart in a second. But what are your initial feelings on the Cleveland Browns, who, as I said, their team needs are listed as cornerback, safety, interior defensive line, and linebacker? It's almost all defensive needs right now, but I still think that they need some offensive linemen as well.
They clearly need an offensive tackle. That is, in my mind, a no-brainer. I'm not in the Greg Robinson fan club. As much as I like my O-lineman, he's, in my mind, not an answer for them. So that they definitely need an offensive tackle. Do they need it more than the other needs? I don't think so. But, they're limited unless they do make a move. And, there's been rumblings that they'd like to move back up and get into the first round. Unless they do that, I don't know that they're going to get a tackle worthy of being any better than what they already have. So, now you're in that boat of Cleveland is maybe going to have to take one of the second tier level cornerbacks. Maybe they're going to take a safety. It'll be interesting. I think probably because they've shown a proclivity for doing this. I think they may make a move. I think that there's a chance that you see the Browns suddenly show up late in the first round, making a trade with somebody in that range, giving up potentially a future draft pick to do so. And as a result, grabbing a corner who happened to slide down. Maybe somebody like a Byron Murphy, maybe somebody like a DeAndre Baker. If they're there later in the rounds because we didn't pick one of them and somebody else didn't snatch them up. They're clearly not going to move up for a quarterback. They're clearly not going to move up for a wide receiver. But that's a possibility, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them do that. Now, I will tell you, I think that the Browns are the second place team in the league. I think, or in the division.
Oh, I was going to say, man, I agree with the division, but I don't know about the whole entirety of the NFL.
In the division. Yeah, no. I overstated my non-real Browns love. I think they're second place in the division. They're not going to win 13 games, and if they do, I will say I was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, what else are you going to say there?
Well, I was going to say something like I'll eat my hat, but I like my hats, and I'm not going to eat one of them. But I don't think I would have any danger of doing so. I'm not really a betting guy, so I'm not going to bet on this. But it would shock me to see them make that kind of a turnaround. Remember, yes, Baker was good, but as all Steelers fans who were standing in the stadium watching the Browns and the Ravens in Week 17 know, he still blew it.
Yeah.
So, there's still there's teams that have now had a chance to look at tape on him. There's the teams in the division have played him. We'll see. It's the second year that starts to make a big difference, and we'll see. He certainly can't complain about lack of weapons at this point. He may be able to complain about protection time. We'll see how that plays out.
Well, I mean, he's a mobile quarterback, which is why I would even like, if Dwayne Haskins went to the Bengals, you see the pattern here. Everybody's getting guys who can move, but maybe not guys that are deliver the ball. I really don't know how to feel about Dwayne Haskins being a Buckeye guy because I've liked him more than some of the past Buckeye quarterbacks, even J.T. Barrett for that matter, and J.T. Barrett darn near had every record at OSU. So, but I mean, I don't know how that's going to translate to the pros. Did we see enough? I mean, Cardell Jones won some games. So, but I could see the Bengals doing something like that because the Steelers are bring the heat. The Ravens were capable of bringing the heat. Can they continue that? I don't know. So when I look at the Cleveland Browns, okay, sure, they have Jarvis Landry. They have Odell Beckham. That could create some matchup problems, but who are they going to create the matchup problems with? Steelers just added Steven Nelson, and they have Joe Hayden. That should lock some of it down. Mike Hilton in the slot. We just talked about the Ravens. Jimmy Smith, Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Carr, Tavon Young. The Bengals are similarly stacked. Dre Kirkpatrick, William Jackson III. I just forgot the guy's name again. That was from Michigan State. They just re-signed. Darn, I forgot. But you see what I mean. Everybody has a pretty solid secondary in the division, except for the Browns themselves. They're trying to get something out of Morgan Burnett.
Right?
What's that? Darqueze Dennard.
Yes.
So But with the Browns, they're two safeties now. Morgan Burnett, good luck if he's healthy. They definitely have a need at safety. Demarius Randall, I want to say, maybe still a need at safety. I couldn't tell you who any of these corners are outside of Denzel Ward. They have a need, and they got rid of Jabril Peppers as well. They have, let me see. So you're looking at their front seven: Myles Garrett, okay; Larry Ogunjobi, okay; Sheldon Richardson. That's a maybe there. Olivier Vernon, yeah, that could look very scary. Jannard Avery as one of the linebackers, Joe Schobert and Christian Kirksey, that should be fairly solid. But, I mean, they let Collins go, and I think there's somebody else that's missing here that's escaping my mind at the second as well. And then, of course, so they have some holes here as opposed to also on the offense. I mean, okay, they're wide receivers. Rashard Higgins is penciled in there. That's who it was, I believe, that I was talking about earlier, and not Ricardo Lewis. Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry. They still have Antonio Callaway, who could be fairly strong there. That's the guy that's the real burner. I forget where he came out of college, but he's going to go into his second year as well. Greg Robertson is one of the tackles. Chris Hubbard, is he a full-time guy? We used to like him as a Steeler. And then you look at their interior guys. Joel Bitonio has been there for a while. J.C. Treader came over last year as a free agent as a center. He was kind of like a backup that got some playing time due to injuries in Green Bay. I'm still not sold on him either. Austin Corbett, second rounder last year, young there. They need some work. David Njoku, here's a guy who has problems with drops as one of their tight ends. There are other options here are Demetrius Harris and Seth DeValve. Not exactly striking fear in me right there. And God forbid if somebody got hurt behind Baker Mayfield. I mean, pretty much we say if any NFL team has an injury at the quarterback position, they're going down with the ship because it's Drew Stanton and they went and got the guy from the AAF, Garrett Gilbert, who I was talking about just a couple weeks ago. So the only real position I see that they're incredibly loaded at here, I mean, obviously you got two guys that are Pro Bowlers at wide receiver, and it's hard to ignore that. But running back, and I didn't quite, understand all of these moves. But okay, you got Nick Chubb, you got Duke Johnson, and apparently Kareem Hunt will be back. How many games? I forget, but he's back sometime.
I don't know. Yeah.
But is Kareem Hunt the same player outside of an Andy Reid system, outside of that offensive line with the Kansas City Chiefs? That is to be determined. I don't know necessarily that he is. You could put Kareem Hunt. It's the same thing with, Alvin Kamara is a very dynamic player, but he's playing with the Saints. You see some of these teams that have systems, Saints, Steelers, the Kansas City Chiefs. These players, it's plug and play. Andy Reid's been able to do this for years, even going back to the Eagles with Brian Westbrook and LaShawn McCoy and guys like that. He's done that with the Chiefs as well, even sometimes, multiple-headed attack like a Charkandrick West or a Spencer Ware. You just plug and play them. So this is where people are already crowning them the division winners just based on, they're going to have Kareem Hunt and David Njoku. And, I haven't seen David Njoku really do anything yet. How is a first-year rookie NFL head coach going to be able to wrap his arms around all of this? You got some very dynamic personalities now because Myles Garrett is definitely a personality. You've got Odell Beckham is definitely a personality. Jarvis Landry is definitely a personality. Baker Mayfield by far is definitely a personality. This is going to be interesting because you talk about drama and stuff like that. If they're winning, I believe all things are going to be well. If they're losing, look out. Who knows?
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I think one of the other things I wanted to bring up is, because they don't pick until 49 right now, they are going to look at a lot of the same second-tier kind of second-round targets that I think the Steelers could have. Guys like Juan Thornhill and Darnell Savage, Rock Ya-Sin that we've talked about, and the corner, I'm going to say his name wrong, but I'm going to give it my best go. From Penn State, Amani Aruwari.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was even close. But the point is, I think, we're used to the Bengals jumping us or somebody else, I guess snapping up a pick that we might have had interest in right before us. The Browns are going to be in that position in the second round because it's going to be their primary pick unless they make a move to jump up and the right kind of guy falls. Look, they could jump us if one of the Devons falls. If the Devons are there at 18 or 19, watch out the Browns could make a move with the Titans or somebody to try and jump us to get a Devin. But I think that's the interesting thing about the Browns this year. Normally they're drafting so high we don't care because they're way up above us. But in this particular year, you do have to kind of worry that the Browns may have some of the same targets that the Steelers have and have a better chance to get them, or maybe willing to be aggressive enough to go get them. Just something to keep in mind. I think that, corner safety, I think, is their primary target in the second round, regardless. If they don't make any other move, I seriously think they're going to look at guys like Juan Thornhill or Darnell Savage. And if those guys are not available to them, or they like one of the other corners better, then that's where they'll go.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of the strange things here. In fact, I was looking here at the transactions for the Browns. It was Ricardo Lewis was waived. I saw it. Derek Kindred, who was one of the safeties, is gone as well. And it's just they let a lot of these guys go that were some of their depth guys. And I understand what John Dorsey's trying to do there, but it's almost like I feel like they're mortgaging everything right now for this short window that they have before they have to start signing all of these first round picks and whatnot. They have a lot of high dollar contracts right now. Jarvis Landry did not come cheap. Beckham did not come cheap. You could only afford that because you don't have to pay Baker Mayfield a lot right now. You don't have to pay Myles Garrett a lot right now. You do not have to pay a Denzel Ward a lot right now. When those guys start to mature, I look at that situation like the Seattle Seahawks, and then all of a sudden that you got to start paying people. Oh, by the way, the Steelers are the only team that has drama, right? What about Russell Wilson and his imposed deadline? I'm not even going to play. I won't sign anything unless you do it. Was that today? That's by today, right? That's Russell Wilson. You never hear anything out of Russell Wilson. He's one of my favorite guys. I would love to see him in a Steelers jersey. I mean, I don't need to see him over Big Ben, but he reminds me of a very similar type player. He is that entire team, and he is that franchise, and he's demanding now a percentage of the salary cap increase as part of his contract, which is nobody's been able to do that yet. And I just had to bring this up as a sidebar because everyone talks about drama. Where did this come from all of a sudden? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, everybody wanted to talk about, Antonio Brown and this toxic locker room and everything else. Let's talk about Pete Carroll and the Seattle Seahawks now. What are you going to do? You're going to be scratching your behind for sure. So, but, I compare the Cleveland Browns to, Seahawks had a lot of success there. The Browns could have a lot of success, and then all of a sudden it's going to be, there's a lot of components, moving parts there. They are a young team. This could turn out very well for them, or it could very much implode. And then what do you do? And trust me, my heart would go out for the Browns if it did implode very badly once again, because everything there looks promising and on the comeuppance. And what can you do next if they end up falling flat on their face? I mean, this is pretty much it. This team better turn around, or what are you going to do? You're going to fire John Dorsey now? What other coaches are you going to find? I mean, you're going to have trouble getting anybody to go there, no matter how much money you end up spending. So it's going to be interesting to see. And you got two wide receivers. We talk about Antonio Brown. He who shall not be named, and 84, Mr. Big Checks. These guys want their stats. Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry have both been guys who've been getting their stats throughout the years. And what happens when it doesn't happen? Maybe it does happen. I just think there's a lot of mouths to feed, and just wow. I mean, it looks dynamic on paper, but we've seen dream teams before, and I'm not ready to crown them necessarily a Super Bowl champion or a division champion yet. On the other hand, everyone that is a Cleveland Browns fan is just totally downplaying the fact, you lost Le'Veon Bell. It didn't have Le'Veon Bell. Did you pay attention to the last season? They had James Conner. And it didn't lose Big Ben. Okay, you lost Antonio Brown. So be it. That's tough. I've said his name again. Darn it. But, I mean, that's somebody that's tough to replace. But you kind of see the future with the Juju Smith-Schuster, and we kind of know what Ben Roethlisberger's been able to do with some lesser talent also through the years. And we know there's other weapons that are there, like a Vance McDonald. So when you're the Cleveland Browns, you still got to defend some of this other stuff that's out there. And I look at their defense and just, are they going to be able to get? Are they going to be able to get to quarterbacks? Are they going to be able to get to a Ben Roethlisberger? It's very much. I don't know that they're necessarily built. Anyone's pretty much built maybe to beat the Bengals. A split with the Ravens or Steelers isn't unrealistic, but I have them as they may have a winning season for the first time this year, but 9 wins maybe that might be my plus or minus there, Brian. And that's just right now. That's in April. I still got to see what they're going to do with the draft and their other moves, but I feel like they don't have a whole lot of leverage to move up in the draft. I feel they don't have a whole lot that these fans think that there's nothing else they need to add just because they got a superstar wide receiver, but they've created some other holes and they have some other gaps that they need to fill, and they don't have a whole lot of ammunition. They don't have a whole lot to work with in the draft in order to do that, and they're starting to run out of cap room to do it through free agency as well.
Yeah, look, I think that they will come in second in the division. I think there's an outside chance that they will be a wild card team. I think we said last year their defense is no joke. It was no joke last year. They have a solid front. Yes, they got holes, and yes, there's ways to beat them. But this is an up-and-coming team, and the rivalry between the Steelers and the Browns looks like it can once again start to be a true rivalry. What will happen with the two teams playing each other? I'm going to tell you that I think that depends on when they play each other. If they get the Browns out of the gate again, they might lose to them. Why? Because the Steelers are slow starters. If they get them at the end of the year, I'm not so worried.
And depending on where they play as well, I think is a big factor.
Absolutely.
Like I don't want to open in Cleveland again, and I honestly don't want to open in Baltimore either. Please stop with opening anywhere with divisional games. Let's get somebody that's outside the division. I don't care if it's an AFC team, like let's say the Tennessee Titans, for example. But I'm just kind of I'm tired of that. I mean, even at that for that matter, like Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, that would look scary as an opener, but I mean. So be it. You know what I mean? It's not a divisional game.
There's rumors they'll open in New England.
Ooh, I don't know. I don't like that
on Thursday night.
I don't necessarily, I only like that for the breather that they get going into the second week of the season, and they have plenty of time to prepare for that Thursday game. And that was a shootout when that happened several years ago. There was also some rumblings of, I think it was Ed Bouchette who had put out that they wanted them to play the Jets right out the gate so you could get the Le'Veon Bell kind of revenge match. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I don't think that's going to look very good in week one. I think it would be sloppy football maybe with both teams. For whatever reason, I don't know why it takes the Steelers 3 weeks to wake up sometimes. But I hope they get over that this time around. You know what I mean?
Well, we've talked about why. It's because their starters don't play.
Well, yeah, they don't play the entire.
They don't play.
And you don't want to risk losing one of these guys. So, what happens? Here's the
catch-22.
Well, here's the theoretical question here. What happens if Jarvis Landry or Odell Beckham goes down in a preseason game? Are they going to play in the preseason game? So I think the Browns may have the same type of problems because before they've had all these young guys. They're hungry. They're younger. They don't have like the veteran pedigree or to be able to say, oh, I'm not going to practice in the preseason. Now you got guys like that are multi-million-dollar investments that, they're going to have the kid gloves on with them, as I like to say. So you may not even want to see Baker Mayfield playing in the preseason. And that really affects your team chemistry. It affects your preparation for the regular season, no doubt. So I don't know. I don't know that there's much else to say about the AFC North teams at this time. I mean, I might sound like a fool in some aspects and a genius in others. So we'll just have to see how this kind of plays out throughout the year. It's just these are the teams you're going to see. You're going to see them twice a year. You got to be able to beat them because, when you have something like the AFC least. And the Patriots are able to beat up on the Dolphins, Bills, and Jets, and that's how they've been competitive all these years because those teams just have not cut it. They have not been able to do it. As far as seeing Cleveland as a wild card team, perhaps, but I look at the AFC South, and they have the Texans, Colts, and Titans. Maybe the Jaguars bounce back around too. And you also have the AFC West with the Chiefs and Chargers. Can't say a whole lot about the Broncos and Raiders other than they should still be better than maybe the Bills and Dolphins and possibly the Jets as well. So, but there's a lot of other wild card teams that are available there in the mix. And the Steelers also have to keep that in mind because that's how they missed the playoffs despite having a winning record at 9-6-1 with that dumb tie. So, Brian, once again, thanks for joining me, my friend. Some closing thoughts.
I do want to say to everybody, take another look at the March of Dimes contest. Anybody making a donation, you've got a pretty good chance of pulling in the Rod Woodson autographed helmet. We've had some donations, but if you made a $10 donation, you got a 1 in 10 chance of winning. You make a $20 donation, you probably got a 1 in 5 chance of winning right now. So you've got a decent chance. If you make the donation, the links will be in the comment area as they have been the last couple podcasts. It's a great cause. It's an important cause. Healthy babies, healthy moms. And maybe you pick up some nice memorabilia, so give it a shot. I also want to make note of something else that I've been noticing on my Twitter account. All of a sudden, I'm getting a lot of Browns podcast guys following me.
Oh, they've come out from under their rocks finally.
I think it's great. And look, I'm not on the Browns are going to win it all kind of a bandwagon. As I said, I think that they're the second best team in the division. It'll be interesting to see what happens when we finally play. I'm expecting to finally get my fair share of trolls.
Yeah, well, we all have some of those, my friend. And, I'm going to have something, too, that I'm going to be talking about on a personal level. My daughter was doing this run and read event just at the tail end of the week, and I'll have some information if anyone's interested in helping out for that. Basically, the only thing I'm asking for is if you have $1 or $2 to put towards this donation, and it has to deal with some of their facilities at their school and keeping those things up to date. She's a kindergartner, but they get some type of bonus incentive if as a class we're able to get a donation from each of the 50 states. So if you're out there, if you have any questions, you have a couple bucks to throw towards that. My email here at Steel City Underground is info@steelcityunderground.com. It's just info at steelcityunderground.com. And that's also the PayPal that you could send it to. Do it, friend. If you do something like that and you don't ask ahead of time, obviously we're very gracious of that, but please do it by friends and family. So therefore PayPal doesn't take like 10 cents off of it and make it goofy. And note where you're sending it from too, because I think it would be very cool. And I think just by having this outlet, I said, I'm going to give my kid a little bit of an edge and just give it a little mention on the podcast here. So, Brian, thank you, my friend. Always a good time.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. And I got New Jersey covered for you. But, if somebody else from New Jersey wants to donate, they can sure do it too. Yeah,
we definitely, and by all means, do that. But I know we got a few corners of the earth, or at least the United States, covered. But there's going to be a few spots that I know for sure. I don't know anybody like in Louisiana or anything like that. So it'd be very cool it'd be cool to see that come in, and if it could fill the whole map up. I'm sure, some of her classmates are going to, kind of hold up their end of the bargain on that too. So we'll see where that stands. And that's only through, I think the final day here, I'm pulling this up, is May 1st. So we got about 2 weeks for that to wrap. So speaking of wrapping, my name is Joe. His name is Brian. We're putting a bow on this show. Until next time, be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.